My question, Mr. Pichai, is did you weigh the input from your employees when making the decision to abandon that project with the United States military?
Congressman, thanks for your concern. As I said earlier, we're deeply committed to supporting the military and the U.S. government. We have undertaken several projects since then. We do take our employees' input into account, but it's one input. We make decisions based on a variety of factors. As a company, we were new in the cloud space at that time. Since then,
thank you. That's a sufficient answer, that you did take their feedback into account. And in fact, some of your Googlers have recently sent you a letter where they've asked you to exit other partnerships as a consequence of ethical concerns. They've asked you to stop doing business with American law enforcement, saying that police broadly uphold white supremacy and that Google should not be engaged in any services to police. And as you well know, you provide some of the most basic services to police, like email, but you also provide services that help keep our cops safe when they're doing their job. And so my question is here in front of Congress and the American people, will you take the pledge that Google will not adopt the bigoted anti-police policy that is requested in the most recent letter?
Congressman, we have a long track record of working with law enforcement when it is supported by due process and the law. We push back against overbroad requests. We are transparent about the requests we get, but we have a long history of following the law and cooperating with law enforcement.
I understand the history. I'm asking about the future. To the law enforcement that are watching today, can they rest assured that under your leadership, Google will not adopt these bigoted anti-police policies?
Congressman, we are committed to continuing to work with law enforcement in a way that's consistent with law and due processes in the U.S.
Well, I greatly appreciate that, and I know that will be very comforting to the police who utilize your services. You mentioned earlier in the discussion about China that your engagement in China was very limited, but yet Google has an AI China Center. The Chinese Academy of Sciences has published a paper saying that enhanced the targeting capabilities of China's J-20 fighter aircraft. You collaborate with Chinese universities that take millions upon millions of dollars from the Chinese military. Matter of fact, one of your Googlers, Fifi Li, while under your employ, was cited in Chinese state media saying, "China is like a sleeping giant. When she wakes, she will tremble the world." The former Secretary of Defense, Mr. Shanahan, said that the lines have been blurred in China between commercial and military application. And as Mr. Buck cited, General Dunford says that your company is directly aiding the Chinese military. And Peter Thiel, who actually serves on Mr. Zuckerberg's board at Facebook, said that Google's activities with China are treasonous. He accused you of treason. So why would an American company with American values so directly aid the Chinese military, but have ethical concerns about working alongside the U.S. military on Project Maven? And I understand your point about cybersecurity and those things, but Project Maven was a specific way to ensure that our troops are safe on the battlefield. And if you have no problem making the J-20 Chinese fighter more effective in its targeting, why wouldn't you want to make America as effective?
Congressman, with respect, we are not working with the Chinese military. It's absolutely false. I had a chance to meet with General Dunford personally. We have clarified what we do in China compared to our peers. It's very, very limited in nature. Our AI work in China is limited to a handful of people working on open source projects, and happy to share and engage with the office to explain our work in China further.
Gosh, I mean, when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff says that an American company is directly aiding China, when you have an AI center, when you're working with universities, and when your employees are talking about China trembling the world, it seems to really call into question your commitment to our country and our values. I see my time's expired. I hope we have an additional round, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, as you know, the proliferation of fake Facebook accounts was a key tool in the strategy of Russian interference in the American election in 2016. American law enforcement, the Senate, the House, have all found that Vladimir Putin engaged in a sweeping and systematic campaign to undermine American democracy in 2016 and to work for a victory for Donald Trump. In his remarkable book, Mind Blank, and I'm being polite here, Cambridge Analytica and the Plot to Break America, whistleblower Christopher Wiley, who worked for several years at Cambridge Analytica, recounts how the Russian assault on America in Cambridge Analytica's research depended on Facebook. Quote, when Cambridge Analytica launched in the summer of 2014, Steve Bannon's goal was to change politics by changing culture. Facebook data, algorithms, and narratives were his key weapons. The Cambridge Analytica team used these tools to identify people who exhibited the three traits in what they called the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. They then proceeded to bombard and activate these people, a small percentage of the American public, but still millions of people, with increasingly dark and manipulative messages from fake Facebook pages, both to get them to vote for Trump, but more importantly, to activate them as racists and white nationalists. And they go on to describe he goes on to describe the remarkable success of this campaign, both electorally, but also politically in the country in terms of sowing the terrible racial and ethnic divisions that you see in America today. So they waged a mass campaign of psychological warfare to polarize America around race and religion and to activate racists and anti-Semites. And it worked splendidly for them, but it didn't work so well for America. So Mr. Zuckerberg, which parts of this narrative have you addressed, or are you planning to address, or do you just see that essentially as the cost of being a forum and a marketplace for ideas? Is there nothing that can be done about the use of Facebook to engender social division in America?
Congressman, thank you. Since 2016, there have been a lot of steps that we've taken to protect the integrity of elections. We've hired, I think it's more than 30,000 people to work on safety and security. We've built up AI systems to be able to find harmful content, including being able to find more than 50 different networks of coordinated and authentic behavior, basically nation states trying to interfere in elections.
Can I pause you? Let me just pause you there for a second, because I'm interested in that. The Stop Hate for Profit campaign is a coalition that includes the Color of Change, the Anti-Defamation League, and other civil rights groups, and they're targeting Facebook right now for a boycott because of the rapid spread of hate messages online, the presence of Boogaloo and other right-wing extremist groups trying to infiltrate and disrupt Black Lives Matter protests, and the fact that alt-right, racist, and anti-Semitic content flourishes on Facebook. So they're asking you to remove these pages and essentially to join the movement for civil rights by not allowing that kind of content. Their boycotters include a lot of big companies, including Patagonia, Levi's, McDonald's, VW, Heineken, and so on. But you seem not to be that moved by their campaign, and I just wonder what you think about what they're asking you to do.
Congressman, thanks. We're very focused on fighting against election interference, and we're also very focused on fighting against hate speech. And our commitments to those issues and fighting them go back years before this recent movement. Since 2016, the defenses that the company has built up to help secure elections, not just in the US, but around the world, I think are some of the most advanced that any company or government has in the world now. We routinely now collaborate with law enforcement and intelligence agencies and are able to sometimes identify threats coming from other countries before governments are even able to. In terms of fighting hate, we've built really sophisticated systems. Our goal is to identify it before anyone even sees it on the platform. And we've built AI systems and, as I mentioned, have tens of thousands of people working on safety and security with the goal of getting this stuff down so that way before people even see it. And right now, we're able to proactively identify 89% of the hate speech that we take down before I think it's even seen by other people. So, you know, I want to do better than 89%. I'd like to get that to 99%. But we have a massive investment here. We invest billions of dollars.
Just my time's almost out. Can you just address the proliferation of fake accounts? I understand annually you get 6.5 billion fake accounts produced there, but in some sense you have a profit motive that's linked to that because that's what's reported to your investors, the number of accounts. Are you working zealously to try to ferret out these fake accounts that are used to spread hate and disinformation?
The gentleman's time has
Absolutely,
expired, but
Congressman.
the witness may answer the question.
Congressman, absolutely. We work hard on this. We take down billions of fake accounts a year. A lot of that is just people trying to set up accounts to spam people for commercial reasons. A very small percent of that are nation states trying to interfere in elections, but we're very focused on trying to find those. Having fake and harmful content on our platform does not help our business. It hurts our business. People do not want to see that stuff, and they use our services less when they do. So we are aligned with people in order to take that down, and we invest billions of dollars a year in doing so.
Yield back, thank you.
The committee will stand in recess for 10 minutes while we fix a technical feed with one of our witnesses. Committee will come back to order. I now recognize the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Armstrong, for 5 minutes.
Google has received criticism about bias against conservatives and content moderation. There were threats of demonetizing the Federalist and numerous other complaints of viewpoint suppression. As a result, a significant portion of the American public has lost trust in your company. A lack of public confidence in a product usually means there is economic harm to the company, but that just isn't the case with Google. So I think it's a legitimate question as to whether Google's market power insulates it from loss of revenue normally associated with offending half the people who use your product. I also think it's a legitimate question to ask if other attempts to regulate your industries have worked. So, Mr. Pichai, Google has restricted advertising analytics or the portability of user data related to advertising due to compliance with the General Data Protection Regulation. Specifically, in 2018, Google restricted the ability to export the double ID, a cookie-based identifier that compiles individual user data and creates profiles through Google data transfer. Is that correct?
Congressman, not familiar with the specifics of that particular issue, but happy to follow up more once I understand it better.
So you're not particularly familiar with how you're complying with GDPR?
Congressman, we've long been working to comply with GDPR. We think it's an important regulation, and we are in full compliance to the extent of my knowledge. I just meant I'm not aware of that specific issue with the identifier you mentioned there, but happy to understand it better and follow up.
All right, so in order to comply with GDPR, Google must retain control over more user data and restrict the ability to combine this user data with other platforms to conduct cross-platform analysis. It seems as if that ultimately limits the ability of advertisers to make comparisons between Google-based campaigns and non-Google-based campaigns. Would you agree with that?
In all these ecosystems, we are balancing between users, advertisers, and publishers. We deeply care about the privacy and security of our users. And so when we serve these ecosystems, we have to take that into account. We have to comply with important laws and regulations in every country we operate in. And so that's the delicate balance we are constantly striking. But we are focused on our users and trying to do the best we can.
And I just want to be perfectly clear. I personally believe that just the market power consolidation is significant, but I also want to be clear that when we're moving forward to regulate this, that we aren't actually squeezing out competition in our quest to do something. Because I've said that before in this hearing, and I'll say it again. Usually in our quest to regulate big companies, we end up hurting small companies more. And I'm a strong privacy advocate, but the consequences of GDPR have been to further entrench large established actors like Google, leading to regulatory capture that exasperates competition concerns. And Google's digital ad market share has increased since the implementation of GDPR. Do you know that to be correct?
Congressman, to just give you a sense of the robust competition we see, ad prices have fallen down by 40% in the past 10 years. And in fact, in the US, advertising as a share of GDP has come down from 1.4% in 1992, less than 1% today. So we see robust competition in the marketplace. And as I said earlier, we have to comply with regulation. We have to interpret it strictly, and we have to balance the ecosystem. But our utmost care is ensuring privacy and security of our users. as we serve these markets.
And I'm glad you mentioned privacy, because I would be remiss if I didn't deal with this issue, because it is so relevant. And I think generally speaking, outside of the political issues and the bias associated with all of this, and this is for essentially all 4 of our witnesses, I think one of our bigger concerns when we talk about data and value, and that data having value and privacy, which is where people really get concerned with how the digital age is moving forward. And there are news reports that law enforcement has made increasing use of what are called geofence warrants. And these geofence warrants allow authorities to compel technology companies to disclose location records for any device in a certain area at a particular time. Court filings suggest that Google received a 1,500% increase in geofence requests from 2017 to 2018, and a 500% increase from 2018 till 2019. And so the Fourth Amendment requires probable cause and specificity, and that's not what these are. These warrants are essentially for any person in an area at a particular time, and geofence warrants require neither. So unless accompanied by particularized information and identifying a subject, geo warrants are essentially general warrants. I believe that the location information should be considered as contents of the Electronic Communications Act under the Stored Communications Act. Do you agree?
Happy to understand more. We deeply care about, this is why we issue transparency reports, because we think it's an important area for Congress to have oversight. And we recently made a change by which we automatically delete location activity after a certain period of time by default for our users. So we are happy to engage with your office, Congressman, and
I'm using you because these are going on in Virginia and New York, I think, right now. But I mean, this equates for everything. I think people would be terrified to know that law enforcement could grab general warrants and get everybody's information anywhere. So it requires Congress to act, and it requires everybody that is a witness in this hearing to be willing to work too, because it is the single most important issue I think we're going to.
Time of the gentleman has expired, but I believe he has a unanimous consent request.
I do. I have a unanimous consent request for a Wall Street Journal article, police request for Google users' location histories face new scrutiny.
Without objection.
And then I have 2 letters. The letters are from Congressman Walden, Congresswoman McMorris Rogers. The first letter is to Mr. Cook of Apple. The second letter is to Mr. Pichai.
Without objection, both may be entered into the record. I now recognize the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being with us. Mr. Bezos, in July 2019, your employee, Nate Sutton, told me under oath in this committee that Amazon does not, quote, use any specific seller data when creating its own private brand product. So let me ask you, Mr. Bezos, does Amazon ever access and use third-party seller data when making business decisions? And just a yes or no will suffice, sir.
I thank you for the question. I know it's an important topic, and I also want to thank you for representing us. I can't answer that question yes or no. What I can tell you is we have a policy against using seller-specific data to aid our private label business, but I can't guarantee you that that policy has never been violated.
Mr. Bezos, you're probably aware that an April 2020 report in the Wall Street Journal revealed that your company does access data on third-party sellers, both by reviewing data on popular individual sellers and products and by creating tiny product categories that allowed your company to categorically access detailed seller information in a supposedly aggregate category. Do you deny that report?
I'm familiar with the Wall Street Journal article that you're talking about, and we continue to look into that very carefully. I'm not yet satisfied that we've gotten to the bottom of it, and we're going to keep looking at it.
Okay.
It's not as easy to do as you would think, because some of the sources in the article are anonymous, but we continue to look into it.
I'll take that as you're not denying that, you're looking into it. I will tell you, a former Amazon employee in third-party sales and recruitment told this committee, quote, "There's a rule, but there's nobody enforcing or spot checking. They just say, don't help yourself to the data. It's a candy shop. Everyone can have access to anything they want." Do category managers have access to non-public data about third-party products and businesses?
Here's what I can tell you. We do have certain safeguards in place. We train people on the policy. We expect people to follow that policy the same way we would any other. It's a voluntary policy. As far as I'm aware, no other retailer limits their use of data at all.
There's no actual enforcement. There's no actual enforcement of that policy. So it's voluntary and there's no actual enforcement. So maybe that answers my...
Sorry, no, I think I may have misspoke. I'm trying to say that the fact that we have such a policy is voluntary. I think no other retailer even has such a policy.
Well,
our
that's...
enforcement of that policy, we would treat that like any internal policy. And if we found that someone violated it, we would take action against them.
Well, there's numerous reports, and the committee has conducted interviews with former employees who confirm that there are employees who do have access to that data and are using it. And so my next question was going to be, if you thought you were actually enforcing these rules, do you think that that's working? And again, I would just say that there's credible reporting that's documented breaches of these rules that you have put into place. And the committee has interviewed employees that typically say that these breaches typically occur. Let's talk about aggregate data for a minute. Your rules do allow for you to access combined data on a product when there are only one or two sellers in the marketplace, correct?
Yes, aggregate data is allowed under our policies. That is correct.
Okay. And interviews with former employees have made it clear that that aggregate data essentially allows access to highly detailed data in those product categories. There's the example of Fortem, a small business that had no direct competitors except for Amazon Warehouse Deals, a resale clearance account that only sold 17 units. An Amazon employee accessed a detailed sales report on Fortem's product with information on how much the company spent on advertising per unit and the cost to ship each trunk. And then Amazon launched its own competing products in October 2019. That's a major loophole, and I go back to the General Counsel's statement to this committee very clearly that there was no access to this data, that Amazon does not use that data for its own benefit, and I'm now hearing you say, well, you're not so sure that that's going on. And the issue that we're concerned with here is very simple. You have access to data that far exceeds the sellers on your platforms with whom you compete. You can track consumer habits, interests, even what consumers clicked on but then didn't buy. You have access to the entirety of sellers' pricing and inventory information, past, present, and future, and you dictate the participation of third-party sellers on your platform. So you can set the rules of the game for your competitors, but not actually follow those same rules for yourself. Do you think that's fair to the mom-and-pop third-party businesses who are trying to sell on your platform?
I appreciate that question, and I like it a lot because I really want a chance to address that. I'm very proud of what we've done for third-party sellers on this platform. We started our third-party platform 20 years ago, and we had 0 sellers on it.
The question
eBay
I'm asking, I'm sorry,
wide.
I'm so sorry,
And
my time is
go ahead,
expiring, and the question I wanted to ask you is that you have access to data that your competitors do not have. So you might allow third-party sellers onto your platform, but if you're continuously monitoring the data to make sure that they're never going to get big enough that they can compete with you, that is actually the concern that the committee has. And, you know, I think your company started in my district. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for the work that you've done and say that the whole goal of this committee's work is to make sure that there are more Amazons, that there are more Apples, that there are more companies that get to innovate and small businesses get to thrive. And that is what we're trying to get at. That is why we need to regulate these marketplaces so that no company has a platform so dominant that it is essentially a monopoly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The time of the gentlelady has expired. I just want to remind the witnesses we appreciate the gratitude for the questions and your description of them as good questions, but we'll just assume that they're good questions and you're happy to answer them so we can make sure we're making good use of your time. And with that, I recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Steube.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pichai, I'd like to start with you, and I'm just going to illustrate my question with a factual incident that actually occurred to me. Several months ago, my wife called and said, hey, there's a good article on the Gateway Pundit that you should read. So out of curiosity, I was up here in Washington, out of curiosity, I Googled Gateway Pundit. And it didn't show up on the first page, didn't show up on the second page. There was a bunch of different blogging sites about how there were disagreements with what was on the Gateway Pundit. But I actually had to type in gatewaypundit.com to get to it. Interestingly, Google didn't allow me to get to the actual website. That was a couple of months ago. Before this hearing, was set to be heard before this hearing was noticed, before you knew that you would be appearing before us today, and that this is an issue that obviously conservatives and Republicans have had. Last week, after this was noticed, this hearing was noticed, I did the exact same thing here in the Capitol. And wouldn't you know it, I Googled Gateway Pundit, and that was the very first website that came up. Now, this isn't from a constituent in my district. This isn't from somebody telling me. This isn't a news report. I actually physically did this on my laptop here in the Capitol several months ago and then today. So clearly, something had happened between not being notified that you were going to be appearing before our committee and then last week knowing that you would be appearing before our committee, and suddenly conservative websites are now at the top of the bar when you search for them. So was there anything done at Google between a couple of months ago and last week or the week before you appearing today that has changed your approach to silencing conservative websites?
Congressman, we approach our work with a deep sense of responsibility in a nonpartisan way. We want to serve all our users, no matter where they are. In fact, it's in our long-term business incentive to do so. And I believe on our platforms, including YouTube, there are more conservative voices than ever before, and we believe in freedom of expression. On the specific issue, I will have to look into it. I obviously wasn't aware of it. We do. It could be a number of reasons. We constantly get reports.
So if you're going to look into it for me, can I expect a response from you, say, in the next 2 weeks as to why that occurred?
Congressman, we'll do our best to follow up, and I'll engage with your office to
Okay,
respond on
we'll
that.
follow up on that. I've got a similar question. So I've been in elected politics for almost 10 years. And when I was in the Florida Senate and the state Senate, I never had a problem with my campaign emails being marked as spam or going to junk folders or anything along those lines. And we had 30, 40, 50,000 people on our email list. And suddenly I get elected to Congress, and I'm now up here in Washington, D.C., and my parents who have a Gmail account aren't getting my campaign emails. My supporters, just last week, one of my supporters called me and said, hey, I just want you to know this, that my Gmail account suddenly is taking your campaign emails that I've received for almost 10 years, and suddenly they're going to spam and junk folders. This appears to only be happening to conservative Republicans. I don't see anything in the news or anything in the press or other members on the other side of the aisle talking about their campaign emails getting thrown into junk folders in Gmail. So my question is why is this only happening to Republicans? And it's a fact, it's happening because I can have my supporters testify that they've received my emails for 9 years, and suddenly this last year, all of their Gmail, my campaign emails in their Gmail are going to their spam folder. So if you could give me some clarification on that, I would appreciate it.
In Gmail, we are focused on what users want, and users have indicated they want us to organize their personal emails they receive from friends and family separately. And so all we have done is we have a tabbed organization, and the primary tab has emails from friends and family, and the secondary tab has other notifications and so on. These things
well, it was my father who was not receiving now my campaign emails. So clearly that familial thing that you're talking about didn't apply to my emails.
Our systems probably are not able to understand that that it's your father. Obviously, we don't have that context there. We just apply it neutrally across all organizations and
well, what assurances can you give me that there's my time's short. One last question. What assurances can you give me that any bias amongst your employees isn't influencing your spam folder algorithms?
Congressman, there's nothing in the algorithm which has anything to do with political ideology, and we do get complaints across the aisle. For example, the World Socialist Review complained in January of this year that their site wasn't found in Google search results, and so we get complaints. We look into it, but we approach our work in a nonpartisan way, and it's in our long-term incentive to serve users across the country. And today, that's why we invest in our radars in 49 states across the U.S. so that we can capture all viewpoints.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Demings, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And let me just say, just for the record, I'm a Democrat from Florida, and I've had heard complaints about my emails going into spam as well, and I'm sure other Democratic members have had the same experiences, unfortunately. Mr. Pichai, in 2007, Google purchased DoubleClick, the leading provider of certain advertising tools. Is that correct?
That's correct, Congresswoman.
When Google proposed the merger, alarm bells were raised about the access to data Google would have, specifically the ability to connect a user's personal identity with their browsing activity. Google, however, committed to Congress and to the antitrust enforcers that the deal would not reduce user privacy. Google chief legal advisor testified before the Senate Antitrust Subcommittee that Google wouldn't be able to merge this data even if it wanted to, given contractual restrictions. But in June of 2016, Google went ahead and merged this data anyway, effectively destroying anonymity on the internet. Mr. Pichai, you became CEO of Google in 2015, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, and this change was made in 2016, is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you for that. Did you sign off on this decision to combine the sets of data with that Google had told Congress would be kept separate?
Congresswoman, any changes we made,
Mr. Pichai, with all due respect, please, did you sign off on the decision or not?
I review at a high level all important decisions we make. We deeply care about privacy and security of our users.
So you signed off on the decision?
User consent for.
Okay, you signed off on the decision. Practically, this decision meant that your company would not combine would now combine, for example, all of my data on Google, my search history, my location from Google Maps, information from my emails from Gmail, as well as my personal identity with the record of almost all of the websites I visited. That is absolutely staggering. According to an email from a DoubleClick executive, that was exactly the type of reduction in user privacy that Google's founders had previously worried would lead to a backlash. And I quote, "They were unwavering on the policy due to philosophical reasons, which is Larry and Sergey's fundamentally not wanting users associated with a cross-site cookie. They were also worried about a privacy storm as well as damage to Google's brand." So in 2007, Google's founders feared making this change because they knew it would upset their users. But in 2016, Google didn't seem to care. Mr. Pichai, isn't it true that what changed between 2007 and 2016 is that Google gained enormous market power? So while Google had to care about user privacy in 2007, it no longer had to in 2016. Would you agree that what changed was Google gained enormous market power?
Congresswoman, this is an important issue. If I could explain. Well, we today make it very easy for users to be in control of their data. We have simplified their settings. They can turn ads personalization on or off. We have combined most of activity settings into 3 groupings. We remind users to go do a privacy checkup. 1 billion users have done so.
Okay, Mr. Pichai, thank you so much for that. I am concerned that Google's bait and switch with DoubleClick is part of a broader pattern where Google buys up companies for the purposes of surveilling Americans, and because of Google's dominance, users have no choice but to surrender. In 2019, Google made over 80% of its total revenue through selling a ad placement. Is that correct, Mr. Pichai? About
majority
80%?
of the business.
Yeah, okay. And because Google sells behavioral ads targeted to each of us as individuals, the more user data that Google collects, the more money Google can make. More user data means more money. Is that correct?
In general, that's not true. For example, when
more
you come
user
in
data,
when you type,
not the more
most
money
of the data
Google
we need is built
collects?
into the
I'm sorry, please. So you're saying that the more user data, it does not mean the more money that Google can collect?
Congresswoman, most of the data today we collect is to help users and provide personalized experiences back. Ad
Okay,
data
thank you
is
so
not
much,
relevant
Mr.
with time at
Pichai.
all.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pichai, is Google going to tailor its features to help Joe Biden in the 2020 election?